There's so much going on around me. Sometimes I think that it is all about me. Then I look around and see what's in front of me. It's you and me in my community.
Yeah, there we go. All right, I'm Scott Hessels. I'm an associate professor at the School of Creative Media. I taught at UCLA, followed by 5 years in Singapore before coming to Hong Kong. My art is, I'm a sculptor, and I work mostly between sculpture, the moving image, and the environment. I'm also the executive producer of Hong Kong's Extreme Environments program, where students, it's a very highly regarded experiment in discovery-based education, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But we're the only art school in the world that takes its students to some of the most inaccessible sites on the planet. So every expedition, students go to an endangered ecosystem, they collect data about that environment, and then they turn it into new media artworks, game applications, interactive cinema, things like that. So the idea is that new ways of presenting this information can be reached to a broader audience. The school I'm at has a unique set of tools for presenting information, 360-degree cinemas, full domes, half domes, robotic controllers, motion capture, all these toys. And data isn't just visualized, it's mediated. In other words, it's interpreted creatively, and then that way it can be shown to a larger audience. The only rule to get onto one of the expeditions is that the artwork has to be directly influenced by nature. Now, normally when I'm asked to speak, I'm either asked to talk about my art or to talk about these expeditions. And I figured at TEDx, I would explain to you why a sculptor is dragging students all over the planet. This is my one chance to sort of bring the two together. All right, for me, I have a very, very broad definition of sculpture. It is simply form in space, nothing else. So if I'm shaping something, then I'm doing sculpture. So it's not a block of marble, it's not me chiseling. For example, I drove a very famous Los Angeles highway with 5 types of sensors. I'd measure the altitude, the tilt, the speed, the direction, and the sound of the drive. I built that into a 3D model, and I used that 3D model to control 2 robotic lights in a room filled with fog. So this sculpture is an actual recreation of driving that road. Okay? So this is sculpture to me. It's form in space. The form is lights, but it's still form in space to me. Now, a sculptor has a will to form. In other words, my goal is to make a shape, right? Now the problem is, this artwork has something else about my particular practice in it. I didn't decide the shape, did I? The topography of that road decided how those lights would move and turn and the shape of the space. So I am surrendering my will to form and giving another force the ability to have control over the final shape of my art. I'm sharing the decision of the shape, okay? So in this piece, I collected translucent materials from all over the world, like things that are almost clear, like feathers, reptile skins, seeds, and I put in front of LED grids, and then each material changes the image based on the density, the color, and so forth. So this is nature as a type of filter. And we have a digital man who's trapped between a digital world and a constructed nature. So, how do I turn up the volume? Yeah. Tommy? This piece, I worked at UCLA, and I collected over 50,000 airborne technologies, the actual pads, and made it into a planetarium show. So instead of stars and planets, you looked at the machines above you. Now these are surveillance satellites, and in a minute you're going to see what they're looking at on the Earth. So this is a representation of how much you're being watched right now from above. So The idea that an outside force can have the influence on the artwork, on the actual form of the artwork, was in a series of sculptures I did called Sustainable Cinema. Now, cinema started with natural materials, with smoke, fire, hand cranks, and then right away got taken over by the digital and the industrial age, right? And I wondered, what would have happened if cinema had stayed with those original natural power sources? So I designed 5 kinetic machines for public space that use natural energy to create the moving image. So I designed a bicycle that plays a movie, and the bicycle crank. So this is like some guy in a village pedaling to each village and then showing his movie. Yeah? This is a praxinoscope. It's a rotating mirror diamond. It was a toy that was used to invent cinema. And here I have it powered by a windmill. So the wind is actually controlling the creation of the movie. I like working with wind. This is a wind-powered shadow puppet show. So the wind controls 2 dioramas, the puppets themselves, and powers the lights, completely powered by a windmill. So these are fake movie history machines. None of these actually ever happened. They're pretend media archaeology. I'm like an old man saying, you know, I remember when movies were powered by the wind. Never happened. Yeah? So what I like about these is that the wind or the water or the cranking decides when you get to watch a movie. You don't get to see anything if there's no wind. Nature decides the form of the artwork. It makes the decision of when you get to watch the movie. So that ties to this program that I'm running here in Hong Kong, which is the Extreme Environments Program. That creative strategy where nature is given the power to share the shaping of an artwork with a student or an artist. The site is giving an authority. Now, these fragile environments are also the loudest. In other words, they're crying very loudly because the damages of the environment are very, very affecting the places in the world that are the most delicate. So you can see the change very rapidly. We partner with scientific organizations, research organizations that are already doing research at these sites. We've lived in desert field stations. We were just aboard a polar research vessel from Russia filled with physicists. We just got back from trekking into Vietnam cave jungles. These partnerships ensure that the footprint by the students is minimal. We are joining existing field research studies, and these organizations are dedicated to the preservation of these natural resources. So we do no damage. Nothing's left, nothing's taken away. The students then convert the data when they get back to Hong Kong. They look for patterns, meanings, and then they present it in new forms. So this is a 360-degree cinema that was done using the footages and the data sets that we collected in Antarctica. So, arts-based field research. How is an artist doing research in a site different than a scientist? Well, a scientist always tries to remove himself from the experiment, right? You don't want to influence the results. But an artist is the exact opposite. The person, the soul, the impressions, the interaction of the artist is the most important part of the experiment. These places, most of you will never ever see Antarctica. Most people on the planet will never see it. So to us, they're almost like virtual environments, right? We only know them through videos and through photographs. They're not real. This is an actual photograph, untouched. But this might as well be a backdrop in, World of Warcraft, right? And so we've got a real virtual reality, and then we also have student avatars. The students themselves capture not only information about the site, but also their reaction within the site, how they respond to it. So we get this sort of mix. We get the site and man in the site working together. It's a dual reaction. So, sorry, let me get back to this. Okay? It's kind of like a new type of spectator. You're watching a relationship between man and nature from a distance. When we were in Antarctica, the students wore black boxes, these weird necklaces that were packed with sensors. So people back home could follow them, and they would get the weather information, they were getting the ocean depth information, voyage charts, but then they were also getting the personal text messages by the students, their diet, their weight, everything. You got the world and man in that world. It was much more relationship based, not just studying the nature, what it would be like to be in that nature. The numbers become personal. So when I say, when we were crossing the Drake Passage from Argentina to Antarctica, the waves were 15 meters high. Now, tie that number to how many times we vomited, how little we ate, and what we were writing to our friends back in Hong Kong, and you get a very different impression of what it's like to be thrown 3 stories up, 3 stories down for 3 days, every minute. Boom, boom. So think about that in this building. 15 meters. So, we collected, let's see if I can remember it all. We had over 1 million lines of data. We had, let me get the numbers here. 85 scientific data sets, 47 sensors, over 1 million lines of data, 70,000 photographs, 100 plus hours of video on 15 different camera systems. And that was just one of the expeditions. But when we get back, it pays off. When we were in Antarctica, over 10 million people followed the kids live while they were traveling, but over 30 million people in Hong Kong and in Asia and around the world came in contact with the data in some form. So we saw Antarctica much more differently than most people would. One of the artworks ran all the student messages home through an algorithm and matched the keywords about feelings to actual environmental data. And then they put it on an LED display that ran the entire 9 floors of the building. One of the other teams noticed that when we would land, we would all scatter to a site and we would do our individual experiments. And this team realized that because we were wearing GPS and altimeters, altitude, we actually surveyed every place we went. And they were able to extrapolate that data, and this is the actual topography of one of the places we actually stopped and did our work. The most direct man in space environment experiments, though, are the performances. So this is a dance piece being performed along a ridge right above Death Valley in the Mojave Desert. Above her are a range of sensors and cameras and filming her and measuring all the information. And then in the installation, it was a robotic installation that recreated the view of the wind above the dancer as she was performing. In Antarctica, we did a kite surfing performance. There were 19 sensors on this buoy and on the kite. And then this was used to recreate and made into a game application that recreated the surfing. Now, this is a very pretty picture, but this is what it was really like. So this is the view from the kite. Yeah, it was about 15 below zero. Full blizzard. Okay, I'm reminding you you're watching art. Yeah. All these sensors help us remember a place more completely. It isn't a snap. Now you're also measuring temperature, weather, acidity, all these different elements, and they can be converted into new media experiences that are sound or immersive or interactive. So it helps us understand the site more thoroughly. Creative media helps us use all of our sensors much more carefully. Now, we just got back this week, like 3 days ago. I was living in a cave. And we went to, we took 15 students to an underground cave network in Vietnam. Now, the trip was designed for especially by the British Cave Research Association. They discovered these sites just 3 years ago. We were the first students and the first artists to ever enter them. Not on the tourist map yet. And it was amazing, honestly. But it was, I don't know how to describe it. So inside these mountains, there are, imagine an entire city block of, say, Shenhua, with 40-story buildings. That's inside the mountain. You would squeeze through this little crack, and you would just be in this site. And the students would do projections, laser scans, dance performances. We did light installations. It was incredible to watch. It was also brutal. I think Vietnam was actually harder than Antarctica and the Death Valley. There were no trails. We hiked straight through the jungle. We climbed jagged mountains. And to get into the caves, you had to swim. You had to like swim through a hole with all your equipment. You come up, and then you had to swim underground in complete blackness, jagged rocks right below your stomach that you can't see, with all your equipment on your back for hundreds of meters. We just got back. That's why I probably have swallowed 1,000 spiders. Right? But I do think that the art out of this expedition will be some of the best student art in the world, and I honestly can say that. The show is going to be in early June, and if you're in Hong Kong, we hope you'll stop by for it. So, climate change has a public relations problem, in the sense that we know that it's happening, right? But we don't feel it. We live in a perfect air-conditioned mega city. We don't feel anything to do with it. So I want to go back to the sculptor and the will to form, the need to shape things. And I want to talk about a story that gives nature the ability to power something. Now this sculpture of mine was up in one of the presidential museums. And it uses the water from the nearby river in the city to control a 4-meter-high wheel. On the inside of the wheel there are frames of animation, and on the outside are cut black slits. And when the water turns, you see a movie play in the falling water. Okay? So, completely powered by this river. But what I want you to notice about the sculpture is the horse. The horse stumbles, right? I wanted to reference Edward Muybridge's study of a horse. This is the first animation. I was using early energy, water, so I thought, hey, I'll use an early animation. This is where cinema started. So my stumbling horse was about analog was stumbling and being taken over by digital in animation, right? But the piece was commissioned in Michigan, in a very poor industrial city. And in Michigan, the automobile industry has essentially collapsed. And the entire state is very poor, and there are very many people out of work. When they visited my sculpture, they did not see Muybridge. They saw the Ford Mustang logo. To them, my sculpture was about the automobile industry. They thought that my sculpture meant that galloping horse stumbling was the automobile industry had collapsed and stumbled, but that these workers had skills that could be applied to a new industry, sustainable energy, water. So this became the sort of symbol of getting back up. That story spread. And families traveled from all over the Midwest to see this water wheel. And fathers would stand next to it with their children and say, look, times are hard, but we've stumbled, but we will get back up. If this piece had been put in a museum, none of that would have happened, right? It's only because it's in the site, it's using the water from the city, from that river, and it's making a story that's so much better and more important than anything that I would have ever said, right? This piece was better because I let the power of making it go. I gave the will to form to nature, and that's what made all the difference. All of us have a tremendous will to form. We want to shape our world into the form that fits us the best. We're trying to be more comfortable. We're trying to make our lives easier. So we're taking nature and we're shoving it into our own perfect specifications. And what I'm saying is, maybe if we let nature have some of that power, the power of our making, we give it away and let nature have some of that force, maybe we will have a much better understanding of our environment. I'm very proud to be a very small part of this program, and thank you very much for having me.